my name is Harriet Joseph, and today I'll be answering the question, how does your media product use or challenge conventions, and how does it represent social groups or issues? As you can see, at the start of my film, I have used the feature film opening convention of having idents. I did this on After Effects and was really happy with the result. Normally, a distributor and production company ident will be shown. In my film, I have the distributor ident, which would perhaps suggest a studio-produced movie. Here in this clip, I have used shaking camera work, which was to create the idea of an unstable world. It's the point at which the killer abducts the female victim. It also happens very quickly, and that was something I wanted to use, as quick action in horror can act as a jump scare, a technique used by many filmmakers to scare the audience. I've used intertitles. This is a very conventional thing to do in films. And when I created those intertitles, as you can see, I did this animated effect where the title would appear multiple times. This was to create the sense of confusion and disorientation, and it related to the protagonist's current state in the world of my film. The decision to use intertitles follows the conventional style of the opening title sequences. The order of my titles is also very conventional. I have started with the title of the film, then leading on to the cast and finally the crew, ending in the director's credit, which is the conventional order of the titles in most movies. In horror films, lighting is a key method to creating the scary atmosphere. I use this to my advantage. I wanted to create an environment that feels unsafe for the audience. I wanted it to also have an element of enigma, so this has also affected how I choose to frame my shots. For example, in this shot, I've used low-level lighting to unnerve my audience as they use their imagination to picture what's in the shadows. For example, the majority of my shots throughout the beginning of the opening are tightly framed, medium close-ups and close-ups, with low-level lighting and some picture grading, increasing the contrast and the warmth to create the almost yellow tint, as you can see above. This helped create the enigma. Here I have successfully used the conventions of horror. In terms of setting, I've kept to the conventions of horror. I chose to shoot my opening sequence in a dark basement with low-level lighting. A reason why setting is so important in horror films is because it adds to the horror. It can leave the audience to feel trapped and also uncomfortable. The dark lighting can also add to the fear, as darkness is a universal human fear. The location being underground was a deliberate choice. It was to invoke more fear in the audience. It leaves the protagonist in a sticky situation, as they will not be able to be heard or escape. In terms of music, I've kept it very conventional. The use of non-diegetic sound is crucial in creating an eerie and tense atmosphere. I used a mixture of sound effects that could layer on top of the soundtrack. I used a glitch sound effects along with a mixture of other Foley effects to create a conventional horror world through a soundscape. Conventionally, a horror soundtrack will be slow-paced and will use violins, pianos, and many more. This is because these instruments are related to themes of sadness, death, and mourning. I choose to use violins as the main base for my sound. However, I got a recording of them being plucked, so it adds an even more intense effect. I have chosen to use a more conventional representation of male and females in my opening sequence. In horror features, there is almost a set representation of certain groups and genders. For example, in films like Friday the 13th, it is common that teenagers in horror films are devious and up to no good, commonly heading to a remote area to partake in sex and drugs. Therefore, they get punished by the antagonist. The representation of males in my film is negative. I reinforce the idea that males are dominant, violent, and aggressive in my film, which is a conventional representation of males in my genre. The only way I could have possibly challenged the conventions is having an antagonist as a young person instead of an older conventional antagonist. In the genre of horror, women are represented in a very certain way, typically over-sexualized, in order to appeal to the male-dominant audience. And I've also stayed away of Laura Mulvey's The Male Gaze when filming my piece. I tried to avoid using the male gaze at all in my film. I showed no flesh and did not treat the body as an object. Overall, my film uses the conventions of the horror genre to its full extent, and I believe I also kept the conventions of representation. Therefore, I have successfully used the conventions of psychological horror to create the desired audience response.